August 19th, 1944. Somewhere outside Paris. The road is choked with smoke, dust, and the smell of burned fuel. Wrecked half-tracks lie nose down in ditches, their steel hulls still ticking as they cool. American fighter bombers circle lazily overhead, engines humming like insects that know they have already won. Oberstleutnant Hans Keller, formerly of the Panzer Lehr Division, steps down from a shattered command car, with his hands raised. He has been fighting for weeks without pause, fuel rationed by the liter, spare parts scavenged from wrecks, replacement vehicles promised but never arriving. What remains of his unit is scattered metal and exhausted men. As an American infantry officer takes his pistol, Keller looks past him. Beyond the hedgerows, a column of U.S. trucks rolls forward, dozens of them. Fresh vehicles, fresh crews. Brand-new Sherman tanks gleam under a layer of dust, engines running smoothly, radios crackling with calm voices. Keller frowns. They have lost tanks here, many tanks, and yet more keep coming. At the temporary POW holding area, Keller sits on an ammunition crate, helmet off, tunic stained with oil and sweat. Nearby, other German officers murmur quietly, replaying the collapse of Normandy in their heads, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything became irreversible. An American major approaches, clipboard under his arm. He is polite, efficient. "Colonel," he says in accented but clear German, "you'll be transported south by morning." Keller nods absently, eyes still tracking the endless movement of American vehicles behind the lines. Tank transporters, fuel trucks, bulldozers, ambulances, all flowing forward as if on a timetable. Finally he speaks. "How many tanks did you lose today?" Keller asks. The major blinks, surprised. He thinks for a moment. "I don't know," he admits. "A few dozen, maybe." Keller stiffens. "A few dozen," he repeats. "In one sector?" The American shrugs. "That's war." Keller studies him carefully. There is no bitterness in the man's voice, no defensiveness, only acceptance. "Were they at all expected?" Keller asks slowly. Now the American looks puzzled. "Expected to be hit?" He considers the question. "Yes, of course." Keller says nothing, but something begins to turn over in his mind. Because in the German army, losses were never expected. They were disasters. In the weeks that follow, Keller is moved through a series of camps, first in France, then across the Atlantic. By early 1945, he finds himself in the United States, held at a POW camp not far from Chicago. It is there, far from the sound of guns, that the real shock begins. One afternoon, Keller is summoned to speak with an American industrial liaison officer, a civilian in a plain suit, glasses perched on his nose. The man spreads documents across a table, charts, production schedules, monthly output figures. Keller stares at the numbers. Aircraft, tanks, trucks, artillery, ammunition. The totals are staggering. "These are projections?" Keller asks. "No," the man replies. "These are targets." Keller runs a finger along a column. "You planned to lose this many tanks?" he asks quietly. The American nods. "Yes." Keller's brow furrows. "Before they were even built?" "Yes." Silence fills the room. In Germany, Keller knows, production planning had been a delicate balancing act, carefully matched to anticipated need. Factories were optimized, resources rationed. Every vehicle, every aircraft, every gun mattered, because replacing it was uncertain. They built just enough, sometimes less. Losses triggered panic, emergency conferences, desperate reallocations. Here, Keller realizes, the Americans had done something unthinkable. They had assumed destruction from the start. Over the following days, Keller speaks with other captured officers, men from logistics, from procurement, from the general staff. All of them have seen similar figures. All of them are unsettled. They expect equipment to be destroyed, says General Major Otto Reinhardt, shaking his head. It is built into their calculations. Yes, Keller replies. They do not react to loss. They absorb it. The realization is profoundly disturbing, because it means the American war effort is not fragile. It is elastic. Destroying a tank does not cripple a unit. Shooting down an aircraft does not cripple a campaign. Even catastrophic losses are treated as variables, not verdicts. Keller thinks back to Normandy, to how German units had clung to damaged vehicles, cannibalizing parts, delaying retreats, gambling everything on preserving equipment that could not be replaced. He understands now that those instincts, logical, careful, efficient, had been shaped by scarcity. The Americans were shaped by abundance, not just of material, but of planning. Factories were not asked to meet the exact need of the front. They were asked to stay ahead of destruction, far ahead. And that difference, Keller begins to realize, may have decided the war long before he was captured. As night falls over the camp, Keller lies awake, listening to the distant hum of trains, freight trains, running on schedule, carrying goods across a continent untouched by bombing. For the first time, he asks himself a question he has never allowed before. What if Germany never lost because of tactics, or courage, or even leadership? What if it lost because it planned for survival, while America planned for attrition? February 1945, POW camp near Joliet, Illinois. Snow crunches under boots as Oberstleutnant Hans Keller walks the perimeter fence during the permitted exercise hour. Beyond the wire, a freight train thunders past, boxcars stretching so long Keller cannot see the end of it. The ground vibrates faintly with its passing. The train is heading east or west. It hardly matters. There are always more. Keller stops walking and watches until the last car disappears. He has been in this camp for weeks now, long enough for the initial shock to fade into something colder and more analytical. He has always been an officer who thinks in systems, fuel consumption, maintenance intervals, replacement cycles. That is why what he has learned here troubles him so deeply. Later that day, Keller is escorted to a lecture hall inside the camp. Rows of folding chairs face a chalkboard. Several other German officers are already seated. Artillerymen, logistics specialists, a former armaments inspector. At the front stands Mr. Charles Whitman, a middle-aged American civilian attached to the War Production Board. His tone is measured, almost academic. "We've been asked to explain," Whitman begins, "how American industry supports sustained combat operations." He draws a rectangle on the board. "This is a tank," he says simply. Keller almost smiles at the absurdity of it. Whitman adds arrows around the rectangle. One from above, two from the sides, one from below. These, he continues, represent losses, combat, mechanical failure, accidents, shipping damage. He turns to face them. "We assume they will happen." A murmur runs through the room. Whitman writes a number beneath the drawing. Then another, larger one, beside it. "The first is how many tanks you need at the front," he explains. "The second is how many you must produce to keep that number stable." Keller leans forward. "The second number is nearly double the first." A German colonel raises a hand. "You are planning for inefficiency," he says sharply. Whitman shakes his head. "No. We are planning for reality." Weeks later, Keller is granted supervised access to a nearby industrial facility as part of an observation program. He expects secrecy. He finds openness. Inside the factory, the noise is deafening. Presses stamping steel, welding arcs flaring, overhead cranes moving components into place. On the line, tanks take shape with relentless speed. Not masterpieces, products. Keller notices something else. Entire sections of the factory appear duplicated. parallel lines, redundant tooling. Zapa's capacity left deliberately unused. Why two? Keller asks the foreman through an interpreter. So we don't stop if one goes down, the man replies without hesitation. And if neither is damaged? The foreman shrugs. Then we build faster. Keller has no answer to that. Germany had concentrated production to maximize efficiency. Single points of failure everywhere. Bomb one plant. Disrupt an entire supply chain. Lose one skilled workforce. Lose an entire category of equipment. Here, loss is diluted. No single factory matters. No single failure matters. Keller realizes that Allied bombing did not merely destroy German factories. It exposed a philosophy that could not survive disruption. Back in the camp that night, Keller writes in a small notebook he has kept hidden since France. They do not fear loss, he writes. They incorporate it. He pauses, then adds another line. We planned to fight a perfect war. They planned to fight a long one. As the lights go out, Keller closes the notebook. He understands now that the factories he saw were not just manufacturing tanks and aircraft. They were manufacturing margin. Margin to make mistakes. Margin to absorb defeat. Margin to keep moving forward even when everything breaks. And margin, Keller realizes with a sinking certainty, is the one resource Germany never had. March 1945, POW Camp, Illinois. The snow begins to melt, turning the ground along the fence line into a grey slurry of mud and gravel. Oberstleutnant Hans Keller walks slowly, hands clasped behind his back, eyes unfocused. He is no longer counting trains. He has stopped being impressed by their length. Now he listens to how often they pass. Morning, midday, night, always on time. That rhythm, more than the numbers he has seen, gnaws at him. Inside the camp library, a converted barracks stacked with technical manuals and translated reports, Keller sits across from Oberst Friedrich Meyer, the former procurement officer. Between them lies a stack of documents, German memoranda, American production summaries, intercepted Allied planning papers now declassified for educational purposes. Meyer taps one page with a finger. This, he says quietly, is where we failed. Keller looks down. It is a German production directive from 1942. The language is precise, almost elegant. Output targets are matched exactly to projected frontline needs. No excess, no waste. Every factory tuned to maximum efficiency. We were proud of this, Meyer continues. Do you remember? Keller does. Efficiency had been a virtue, a cultural instinct. Germany had built its industrial doctrine on precision. Engineers solving problems by eliminating slack, tightening tolerances, reducing redundancy. In peacetime, it had been a strength. In war, it became a trap, because war does not reward perfection. It rewards survivability. Keller recalls a conference in Berlin in late 1943. Bomb damage reports lay scattered across the table. One factory in Kassel hit, another in Schweinfurt partially disabled, bearings production disrupted, engine output delayed. The room had gone silent, not because production had stopped, but because there was nowhere else to make them. German industry had been designed like a finely tuned machine. Remove one cog, and the whole mechanism seized. By contrast, the American reports Keller now reads describe an entirely different mindset. Factories assumed interruption. Rail lines assumed sabotage. Shipping assumed loss at sea. Even worker absenteeism was calculated into output curves. Losses were not contingencies. They were inputs. One afternoon, Keller attends a small discussion group organized by the camp commandant. The Americans are careful to keep it non-confrontational. This is not propaganda. It is explanation. A young American officer gestures toward a chart pinned to the wall. This, he says, is why we could keep going after setbacks. The chart shows two curves, one jagged and brittle, the other broad and forgiving. The German curve, the officer continues respectfully, is optimized for peak output. Ours is optimized for continuity. Keller studies the lines. Peak output had been Germany's obsession, squeezing the most from the least. But peak output collapses when the peak is struck. Continuity bends. It absorbs shock. Keller feels a bitter recognition. They had mistaken fragility for discipline. That evening, Keller speaks with General Major Reinhardt again, this time over weak coffee in tin cups. "We built for excellence," Reinhardt says. "They built for replacement." "Yes," Keller replies, "and excellence cannot be replaced." They sit in silence. Keller thinks of the Tiger tanks, magnificent machines, over-engineered, devastating when they worked. But every Tiger lost was a strategic event. Crews waited months for replacements that never came. Workshops cannibalized one tank to save another. The Americans, Keller now understands, never allowed any single machine to become irreplaceable. Their Shermans burned more easily. Their aircraft lacked the refinement of German designs. But they came back, always back. In April, Keller is permitted to attend a film screening arranged by the camp staff. The footage is industrial, grainy black-and-white reels of American factories during the war. Assembly lines stretching into the distance, workers clocking in and out in shifts that never end. What strikes Keller is not the speed, it is the calm. No urgency, no heroic rhetoric, just repetition. The same motion, the same weld, the same bolt. Again, again, again. This is not mobilization. This is normalization. America, Keller realizes, did not treat total war as an emergency state. It treated it as a process. Germany had mobilized furiously, desperately, always reacting, always catching up. America had planned to stay at war for years, and because of that, it could afford to lose. Late one night, Keller returns to his notebook. "We believed," he writes slowly, "that building exactly what was needed was wisdom." He pauses. In truth, it was fear. Fear of waste, fear of loss, fear of imperfection. He underlines the next sentence. The Americans were not afraid of loss. They were afraid of stoppage. That distinction settles everything into place. German strategy had been shaped by scarcity. Every decision aimed to preserve what little remained. American strategy had been shaped by abundance, but more importantly, by foresight. They had asked a different question. Not how do we avoid losing equipment, but how do we continue fighting after it is gone? Keller closes the notebook and leans back. Outside, another train passes in the dark, not carrying victory, not carrying glory, just carrying replacement. And Keller finally understands that the war was not decided by a single battle or even a single campaign, but by a choice made years earlier in quiet rooms far from the front. Germany had built for a war it hoped would be short. America had built for a war it knew would destroy almost everything it touched, and planned accordingly. April 1945, Washington, D.C. Oberstleutnant Hans Keller does not expect to be here. The war in Europe is nearing its end. Germany is collapsing in on itself. Cities are rubble. Armies are dissolving. And yet Keller, a captured German officer, sits in the back row of a government briefing room, thousands of kilometers from the ruins of Berlin. The room smells of paper, ink, and cigarette smoke. At the front, a large chart is unrolled across a stand. An American official, civilian, middle-aged, no uniform, taps the pointer lightly against the paper. "This," he says, "is total U.S. armored vehicle production, 1940 through projected 1945. Keller leans forward. The line rises steadily, almost lazily, before climbing into something close to absurdity. Shermans, half-tracks, tank destroyers, recovery vehicles. Numbers so large they cease to feel real. The official continues. These figures already include expected combat losses. Keller's pencil pauses mid-note. Expected, he murmurs. The official flips the chart. Aircraft production. Fighters. Bombers. Transports. Another line climbs. Another projection assumes loss. Another assumes replacement. Not emergency replacement. Scheduled replacement. As the presentation continues, Keller realizes something deeply unsettling. These numbers were not drawn after the war began. They were drafted years earlier, long before Normandy, long before Stalingrad turned the Eastern Front into a furnace, long before German officers like Keller ever sensed the tide turning. The Americans had not reacted to loss. They had prepaid for it. One chart shows expected monthly aircraft attrition in combat theaters. Next to it, planned output exceeds losses by a deliberate margin, a buffer, a safety net. Keller feels a tightening in his chest. In Germany, attrition reports were nightmares. Urgent memoranda sent up the chain of command, triggering frantic debates about reallocation, priority access, miracle solutions. Here, attrition is simply shaded grey on a graph, already accounted for. During a break, Keller stands near a window overlooking the city. Traffic moves smoothly below. No blackouts, no rubble, no urgency. An American analyst joins him, coffee in hand. "You look surprised," the man says kindly. Keller chooses his words carefully. "In Germany," he says, "losses forced decisions, delays, retreats." The analyst nods. "Here, losses force recalculation, but not reversal." That sentence echoes. Not reversal. Keller realizes that American commanders were never asked the question Germany faced constantly. Can we afford to lose this? The answer had already been decided. Yes. Later, Keller is shown something even more revealing. Not charts, schedules, factory retooling calendars that stretch years into the future. Contingency plans for strikes, shortages, labor turnover. Entire production lines designed to shift output without stopping. "Why plan this far ahead?" Keller asks. The official smiles faintly. "Because wars don't end when you want them to." Keller almost laughs. Germany had built its entire strategy on ending the war quickly, on decisive blows, short campaigns, and the hope that enemies would collapse before scarcity caught up. When that hope failed, everything failed with it. America, by contrast, had assumed the opposite, that the war would be long, that losses would be horrific, that equipment would burn, sink, crash, and shatter by the tens of thousands, and so they planned not to avoid loss, but to outlast it. That night, back at his temporary quarters, Keller opens his notebook again. "This is when I understood," he writes, "that the war was decided by arithmetic." He pauses, then continues. "Not tactics, not courage, not even leadership. Arithmetic. Germany's numbers were exact. America's numbers were forgiving. One system collapsed when stressed. The other absorbed stress as designed." Keller underlines the next line twice. "We treated loss as failure. They treated it as consumption. Consumption, like fuel, like ammunition, like time. Used up, then replaced." As April turns to May, news reaches Keller that Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. The war in Europe is finished. American officers are subdued in their reactions. There are no parades in Washington that night. No emotional speeches in the briefing rooms. The machinery simply shifts. Production schedules are revised. Some lines slow, others convert. The system does not celebrate. It adjusts. Standing alone, Keller looks again at the final production chart, one that shows unused capacity, factories never fully pushed to their limit, capacity held in reserve, margin. He finally understands the cruel irony. Germany had fought with desperation because it needed to win quickly. America fought with patience because it never needed to hurry. And that difference, quiet, bureaucratic, numerical, had crushed everything Keller once believed about modern war. May 1945, POW Camp, Illinois. Spring has settled in. The snow is gone. Grass pushes up along the fence line, uneven and pale. For the first time since Keller arrived in America, the air smells faintly of warmth instead of steel and cold. The war in Europe is over. The announcement comes without ceremony. A notice read aloud. A confirmation posted on a board. Germany has surrendered. Hostilities have ceased. Around Hans Keller, the reactions are muted. Some men bow their heads. Others close their eyes. A few simply nod, as if they had already reached this conclusion months ago. Keller feels no surge of emotion, no relief, no grief. Only a quiet certainty that the end had been inevitable long before May 1945. Because the war, as he now understands it, had not been lost in the ruins of Berlin. It had been lost in factories that never stopped. That afternoon, Keller sits with a small group of officers under the shade of a wooden awning. Someone has obtained old newspapers, American editions from 1942 and 1943. Headlines boast production milestones once dismissed in Germany as propaganda. 10,000 aircraft this month. Liberty ships launched in days, not months. Keller scans the pages again, slower this time. He sees what he missed before. These headlines are not triumphalist. They are logistical. The tone is not victory. It is throughput. An artillery officer beside him mutters, "We would have hidden these numbers for security." "Yes," Keller replies quietly, "and because we feared what would happen if we could not meet them." He folds the paper. The Americans, he now realizes, never feared failing to meet production goals. They feared not having goals large enough. In the weeks that follow, Keller is interviewed by a group of U.S. officers compiling post-war analyses. They ask about German planning, about bottlenecks, shortages, decision points. Keller answers honestly. "We built for perfection," he says, "which meant we could not tolerate loss." One officer leans forward. "What happens when perfection breaks?" Keller does not hesitate. "Everything breaks with it." He explains how German commanders delayed withdrawals to save equipment, how divisions were held in place, waiting for spare parts that never arrived, how entire operations were shaped around preserving assets that could not be replaced. "In the end," Keller says, "we fought the war to protect our weapons, instead of using weapons to fight the war." The Americans exchange glances, not smug, not judgmental, just attentive. Later, Keller walks alone near the fence again. A train passes in the distance, slower than before. Fewer cars. The war economy is already winding down, but the tracks remain. The factories remain. The margin remains. He thinks of a conversation he once overheard in Berlin, late 1944. A senior official had said, "If we lose another 1,000 vehicles this month, we cannot continue." At the time, Keller had accepted that as reality. Now he understands it was a confession. America never reached that sentence, not because it never lost thousands of vehicles, but because it had already decided those losses were acceptable, normal, routine. That night, Keller writes one last entry in his notebook. "We thought," he writes, "that planning for loss was pessimism." He pauses. In truth, it was maturity. He reflects on the central irony that now feels unavoidable. Germany, disciplined and efficient, had planned a war that demanded constant success. America, chaotic and extravagant by German standards, had planned a war that could survive failure. Only one of those approaches works when the war lasts longer than anyone expects. Keller closes the notebook. Beyond the barracks, lights dim gradually across the camp. No alarms. No urgency. Just systems powering down smoothly. The kind of ending Germany never had, and Keller knows, with a clarity that no interrogation could have forced out of him, that this was the final lesson of the war. You do not win modern wars by avoiding loss. You win them by deciding, long before the first shot, how much loss you can absorb without breaking. America had answered that question in advance. Germany never had. June 1945. POW Camp, Illinois. The camp is quieter now. Guards still walk their rounds. Roll calls still happen. But the edge is gone. The war that once defined every hour has retreated into memory, replaced by waiting. Waiting for transport, for paperwork, for a future that no one can yet picture clearly. Hans Keller sits alone at a wooden table near the fence, the notebook closed in front of him. He does not write anymore. There is nothing left to solve. Across the camp, a group of younger German officers argue softly about tactics, about what might have worked if decisions had been different in 1943, if more fuel had been available, if one offensive had broken through instead of stalling. Keller does not join them. Those questions no longer interest him, because he now understands that none of those moments mattered as much as they believed. Earlier that week, Keller had spoken with an American logistics officer overseeing post-war drawdowns. The man had shown him charts, not of growth this time, but of reduction. Factories slowing, lines converting, warehouses emptying. "What happens if another war comes?" Keller had asked. The officer shrugged. "Then we ramp back up." "How long?" Keller pressed. The man thought for a moment. Months? Maybe less. That answer lingered with Keller, long after the conversation ended. Germany, even at its peak, had needed miracles, new designs, desperate reorganizations, political interventions to increase output. America needed a schedule. Keller looks back now on the early years of the war with new eyes. Poland, France, the Balkans. Germany had won quickly and efficiently, not because it was stronger in absolute terms, but because its enemies had not yet mobilized fully. Those victories had reinforced a belief that precision, speed, and exact planning were sufficient. They were not wrong. They were incomplete. When the war expanded, geographically, industrially, temporally, Germany's system revealed its fatal flaw. It had no depth. Every loss pushed it closer to collapse. Every setback demanded improvisation. Every delay tightened the noose. America's system did the opposite. Every loss activated replacement. Every setback refined procedure. Every delay was absorbed by margin. By the time German officers realized this, the war was already unwinnable. Not lost, unwinnable. One afternoon, Keller is asked to speak to a group of American cadets visiting the camp as part of a post-war study program. They expect tales of battles, of daring maneuvers, of armored breakthroughs. Keller disappoints them. "If you want to understand why Germany lost," he says calmly, "do not study our tactics, study our factories." The cadets exchange puzzled looks. "We fought brilliantly," Keller continues, "often better than our enemies on the battlefield. But brilliance cannot compensate for fragility." He gestures toward the horizon. "You can lose 1,000 tanks and still fight if you planned to lose them. You cannot lose 10 tanks and survive if you never expected to lose even one." The room is silent. Keller knows the lesson will not be forgotten. As summer deepens, news from Europe filters in. Cities rebuilding, railways reopening, American factories already shifting to civilian production, refrigerators replacing bombers, tractors replacing tanks. The same system, different output. Germany, Keller knows, will take far longer. Its factories had been destroyed, its skilled labor scattered, its industrial web shattered at the critical nodes. There was no redundancy left to reactivate, no margin to restart. On his final evening in the camp, Keller walks the perimeter one last time. The fence casts long shadows in the low sun. Somewhere beyond it, a freight train passes, shorter now, slower. He does not count the cars. He already understands what they represent. Margin, planning, acceptance of loss. Keller stops and rests his hands on the fence. He thinks of the officers he served with. Men who believed deeply in discipline, efficiency, and precision. Men who did everything right according to the rules they were given. Those rules had simply been wrong for the kind of war they were fighting. Modern war, Keller now knows, is not decided by who builds the best machine. It is decided by who builds the most replaceable one, by who assumes failure is inevitable and survives it anyway. The American factories had done exactly that. They planned for destruction, and because of that, destruction never stopped them. Keller closes his eyes. The war had been lost long before the first tank rolled into Normandy. It had been lost the moment Germany chose to build just enough, and America chose to build more than it would ever need.